Y'all said, peekaboo, I see you. Hello and welcome to the Jaybefaunt channel. I am your host, James Fauntleroy. So good to see all of you here on this Thursday evening. So good to have you. The Jaybefaunt channel is available on all major podcast platforms, so go ahead and subscribe there. Also part of Revolutionary Blackout Network, so you can see me there on Sundays for the JB show and Thursdays for the Sabby and JB show, typically, but not tonight because Sabby is on vacation. So that's why I'm in front of you right now. So good to see all of you here watching me live for this. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and give the stream a like. This pushes me onto the algorithm so that I can be able to present more to people. We can help educate, inform, and inspire on this channel. So thank you so very much. If you guys have not already, you can go to my Substack at jaybefaunt.substack.com. This gives you email notifications whenever I go live, upload clips, or write any articles. So you guys have that there. All right. So good to see all of you here watching me this evening. I know this is not my typical time, but I figured, what the hey, might as well I do a reading today just to get the juices flowing, the intellectual juices flowing. So I just wanted to do that. I wanted to go into the chat just to say hello to a few people that are in here that are watching so far. We have CBC voter coming in saying, yo, 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 happy Thursday, JB. Good to see you in here, CBC voter as well. There is a lot that that I would like to get into as well for this particular reading. Just give me 1 second. I just want to make sure I do this too. All right. Da-da-da. All right. Just want to make sure I have everything in order. Everything is copacetic. So what are we going to be doing tonight? Well, we're going to be reading Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents by Margaret Kimberly. We're going to be covering sections 2 and 3. This is going to be covering the sections of President John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. So we're going to be getting into that right now. So we read the prologue and then we got to reading the first section. I was calling them chapters, but they're really sections because they're not that long. But one of the first things that we actually talked about in the first section was George Washington. And in the preface, it was, she talked about the relationship of Black people to the founding fathers, the relationship between Black people and the presidency. And as we see right now, we are literally in the cusp of, not the cusp, but we are literally in the middle of a presidential election. And right now you have the Republican primary happening. Republican National Convention happening right now. It's literally their 4th day of their convention. And, we had a former president that was near, in an assassination attempt last Saturday. And so right now, I was watching a show earlier, and one of the shows earlier was talking about how after that assassination attempt, and now Donald Trump is running, again for the presidency. One of the things that was noticed was that a lot of people, particularly MAGA supporters, are upset that there's a lot more diversity in the RNC convention. And there's also been an influx of Black people who have been more interested in the Republican Party, more interested in Donald Trump, because they feel like the Democratic Party has abandoned Black people, and the fact is that the Republican Party, they feel, may be a different animal altogether, something better for us economically. Now, me and my personal opinion, that's not the case. They are no better than the Democrats. But unfortunately, the Democrats have done so bad that that's the way the Republicans are now gaining more Black support. But I'm pretty sure that there will have to be an update to this. Margaret Kimberly will have to do an update to this and showing, the uptick in Black support, but then also if Donald Trump does win in November, in 4 years, we will see how Black people really think about a Donald Trump second presidency if he wins again. And that'll be a very interesting undertaking in this book. So with that being said, we're going to continue in the Founding Fathers section. Now we're getting into section 2. We're going to be getting into John Adams, not John Quincy Adams, but the first John Adams. So we're going to be getting into that right now. If you do not have your tea, I highly suggest you get it right now because I'm about to get started. All right, let's go. John Adams, 1797 to 1801. Of the first 12 presidents, John Adams and his son, John Quincy Adams, were the only two who were Northerners and non-slave holding. But the elder Adams was far more pro-white than he was anti-slavery. He expressed racist views early in his life and took part in the shameful libel of a dead Black man to win a court case. Adams represented the British soldiers who took part in the 1770 Boston Massacre. Crispus Attucks, a man who had escaped slavery, was the first victim to fall on that day. Adams' defense strategy included blaming Attucks, quote, to whose mad behavior, in all probability, and dreadful carnage of that night is chiefly to be ascribed, end quote. Adams also represented slaveholders in 4 cases in which enslaved people sued for their freedom. He lost 3 of the 4 and later wrote dismissively, quote, I was concerned in several causes in which Negroes sued for their freedom before the revolution, end quote. He felt more angst on behalf of white Southerners than he did for enslaved people. And he asserted that the condition of the common sort of white people was more oppressed, degraded, and miserable than that of the Negroes. It's funny, that part, the condition of the common sort of white people was more oppressed, degraded, and miserable than that of the Negroes. That sounds a lot like what some Republican voters, some conservatives are saying today. They'll talk about things like DEI. They'll refer, to the Great Replacement theory. They'll talk about how the birth rate of white children is dropping. Hell, even Elon Musk tweets about this on Twitter. And it's kind of funny how, history may not repeat itself, but it damn sure rhymes. And so that's something that they're sounding like John Adams. And then some will probably go, well, John Adams, he didn't own any slaves. Yeah, but he was definitely cool with the slave owners. Just an interesting thought. Adams bragged that he had never held a slave, though he could have done so in Massachusetts for most of his life. Despite his self-congratulation on the subject, he didn't think slavery was so terrible that it needed to end. And he made clear that he avoided animated speeches and inflammatory publications expressing opposition to the institution. He was concerned about the prospect of Black people, whether free or enslaved, rising up violently against whites. First of all, I have heard from white people that said one of the reasons why they're afraid of more equality, it's not all white people that I've heard this from, but some have said the reason why they're afraid of more equality is because they feel like we're going to do to them what they did to us. That guilt, man, is high. Wow. Adams feared Black freedom more than he thought that slavery was wrong. And he argued that the abolition of slavery must be gradual and accomplished with much caution and circumspection. So he was like a Democrat, you know? He was like a right-wing Democrat today, if you think about it. Because when it comes to progress, they want this piecemeal milquetoast progress that inches forward a little bit, little by little. Like, okay, we'll give you your freedom, but we're just going to inch it little by little. Okay, first we want to make sure that slaveholders are kind of nice to you, right? And then we can work our way from that. That's how it feels, right? That's what John Adams sounds like. He sounds like a Joe Biden, right? Violent measures will produce greater violations of justice and humanity than the continuance of the practice. Would probably excite insurrections among the Blacks to rise against their masters and imbue their hands in innocent blood. That's a quote from John Adams. Adams identified with his fellow white people, particularly white Southerners, with whom he promised not to interfere. The present slaveholders cannot justly be approached. They have given proofs of dispositions favorable to the gradual abolition of slavery, more explicit than could have been expected. Like many presidents who followed him, Adams favored colonization, the forced removal of Black people from the United States. 30 years after the Revolutionary War, he condemned the British for again giving freedom to enslaved people who fought for them, this time in the War of 1812. He said, instead of leaving the stolen Negroes to starve in Halifax, in London, or sending them to Sierra Leone, they have now planted a colony of them in Nova Scotia. 1,000 families are established in one settlement, with 10 acres of land granted by the Crown to each with an allowance of instruments and provisions for 2 years. From this nursery are hereafter to be drawn recruits to invade the southern states and entice and seduce other Blacks to dissent or rebel against their masters and the nation. This is why they're afraid of communism. This is why they're afraid of socialism. Think about it. Because back in the day, in the War of 1812, they didn't want Black people to see other free Black people, especially if Britain was to grant them their freedom. And if they could be granted freedom, then why can't the United States grant them their freedom? Right? And so basically, they didn't want a bunch of uppity Negroes. And the corporate dictators of today do not want you to get uppity and demand housing for all, healthcare for all. They don't want you to get uppity and demand a climate where you can actually have a healthy environment, where you can, go to the beach, don't have to worry about climate change, go hunting and fishing. They don't want you to have to worry about that. They want you to just stay complicit, stay compliant, and keep the system going as is. If you see a better system, and if you start to know how other people in other countries are doing better, then, well, that's competition. That's something that capitalism doesn't like. Remember, kids, capitalism doesn't like competition. It stifles it. And in fact, this reminds me of a tweet that was shared by Carl Jha. Let me share this really quick before we continue, because this actually goes really well with what I'm saying here. All right, share the screen really quick. Carl Jha says, China eliminated extreme poverty, but at what cost? Right? Well, here's another New York Times headline. It says, jobs, houses, and cows, China's costly drive to erase extreme poverty. The blurb says, China has spent heavily to help its poorest citizens, an approach that few developing countries can afford, and even Beijing may struggle to sustain. So ultimately, what they're saying is, well, they're doing all this good stuff, but it's going to cost them a lot. This same virtue signaling that the US is doing, oh, baby, they did it years ago when it came to the freeing of slaves. Oh, slaves will have their freedom, but at what cost? Right? I bet you they said the same thing about the 40-hour work week. Well, if workers are going to be working a max of 40 hours, at what cost is it going to be to our economy? And it's always demonizing a better system and saying, well, it's going to cost us, it's going to cost them a whole lot more. I don't think this is a good thing. When in reality, it will be more beneficial for us. That's how they do it, man. Let's continue. John Adams has been damned with faint praise for never owning slaves, but his fear of Black people and their continued presence in the country explains why he and his northern brethren bent over backwards to adhere to the demands of the slavocracy. Adams wanted Black people to be kept subservient, or better yet, kept out of the country altogether. Adams and other Northerners weren't that different from their slave-holding countrymen in their feelings of racial superiority. They saw Black people as irritants and inconveniences at best, and murderers at worst. They had no inclination at all to advocate for the enslaved. Adams admitted as much. They saw Black people as irritants and inconveniences at best and murderers at worst. I'm going to change the word. They saw immigrant people as irritants and inconveniences at best and murderers at worst. I'm going to change the word again. They saw trans people as irritants and inconveniences at best and murderers at worst. I'm going to say it again. They saw disabled people as irritants and inconveniences at best and murderers at worst. Baby, the song doesn't change, just the dance does a little bit. This is why the system needs to change. Adams did not change in the years after his term in office ended. He continued to fear the presence of Black people, and he saw no value in giving them their freedom. In 1814 letter, he predicted the emancipation would end with the shiftless perishing from want or asking the old aristocratical masters to take them back, or inroads, depredations, and brigandages. Even after declaring himself utterly averse to admission of slavery into the Missouri Territory, and in an 1821 letter, he didn't want to say so publicly. He feared that his son John Quincy's political career might be damaged by heated, prejudiced minds of Southern people. He begged his friends, "I hope you will by no means publish my letter." Perhaps Adams felt the fact that he never owned another human being absolved him from needing to express any pro-emancipation opinion. He could be honest in his apathy towards Black people, unlike his successors Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, who engaged in breathtaking hypocrisies. So, this describes a lot of people, and maybe I'm being a little hyperbolic here, but this describes a lot of people who will say, well, my family never owned slaves. And yet you still benefit from this system that was set up. John Quincy Adams didn't own slaves, but he still benefited from the system that was set up. I think it's important that we continuously talk about that, because a lot of times people will say, well, I never owned slaves, so therefore why are reparations owed? Because number one, it was promised to us by a government official, General William T. Sherman. It was by, an order through the Department of War, Special Field Order number 15. Also, that money would come from the federal government. It wouldn't come directly from white people. And then on top of it all, white people who say, well, we never owned slaves. The thing is, like, no, you didn't. But you never tore down the systemic racism that we continuously have within our institutions either. So you still benefit. So if you really want to actually have true equality, then, well, tear down those systems. John Quincy Adams didn't own slaves, but he did benefit from that system. If you really want it to be fair, all right, tear down the systems. But no, that's our institutions. The institutions that are rife with white supremacy. See, you don't want to tear down the institutions, but then you don't want to be blamed for benefiting from a system that favors one skin color over another. Which one is it? Don't let me get started. But anyway, let's continue. Now we're going to be moving on because we finished part 2. We're going to go on to part 3. We're going to talk about Thomas Jefferson. And this one's a doozy because Thomas Jefferson was a bastard. Sip your tea for this one. Y'all ready? All right. Thomas Jefferson, from 1801 to 1809. Jefferson presents a contradiction for the apologists and idol worshippers. For obvious reasons, they admire his erudition and scholarship, but they cannot sugarcoat the fact that he owned more than 600 human beings during his life and had sex with at least one of them when she was a minor child. Thomas Jefferson was a pedo. Yep. Thomas Jefferson was one of the worst human beings that you could ever think of. The people who you guys talk about, oh man, we need to kill him, we need to castrate him, blah, blah, blah. And yet you guys worship and revere that man. He has statues. He owned human beings and he was a child rapist. And they knew it was wrong. They knew. But they had to and people say, well, the thoughts were different back then. No, it wasn't. Mm-mm. No. They had laws against being gay. They can have laws against being gay, but doing things with little kids is okay? No, they knew it was against doing things to little kids. It was wrong to do things to little white kids. But kids that look like me? Oh no, they didn't think that way. It was permissible. It was allowed. Sexual assault was allowed because we weren't considered human, remember? We were 3/5. So therefore, not a human means consent. What the hell is that? You're not a human. Let's continue. Yeah, he also claimed to have misgivings about slavery. Thomas Jefferson was the worst kind of hypocrite on this topic and one who defined his time because his wealth depended on his ownership of human beings. Jefferson said that he wanted the gradual abolition of slavery. Again, somebody who wanted to tweak around the edges, somebody who wanted progress in a milquetoast way, little by little, crumb by crumb. But during his lifetime, he freed only 2 of the people he owned and only 5 more in his will. It should no longer be acceptable to overlook the profit Jefferson made from involvement in a cruel and barbaric industry. The early presidents established a mandate to expand feverishly westward, relentlessly occupying Indian land and turning it over into a white settler population. Kind of like Palestine. Jefferson is credited, if such a positive word could be used, with transacting the Louisiana Purchase. The United States doubled in size in 1803 when France agreed to sell off its last of its territories on the North American mainland. The 827,000 square miles of territory west of the Mississippi comprise what are now Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and portions of Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, New Mexico, Texas, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and of course, Louisiana. The sale was driven by the French need for money after the loss of their extremely profitable plantation economy in the wake of a successful Haitian slave revolt. So the United States got bigger because the slaves revolted against France. If the slaves never revolted against France, the United States would be a hell of a lot smaller. The ultimate irony is that the end of the Haitian slavery increased the amount of territory that would be available to the American plantation economy. The purchase included land still inhabited by indigenous people, most of whom had no idea that France had claimed ownership of their homes or that the United States now possessed them. Reminds me of what Britain did to Palestine, and then gave Palestine over to Zionists. It wasn't their land to begin with. And what do? They decided to hand it over to another people, even though the Palestinians had no say in it at all. Jefferson, who was ostensibly held the opinion that slavery was evil and unjust, could have forbidden the practice in the newly acquired territories when in March 1804, Congress gave him full executive, judicial, and legislative power over them. He drafted the territorial constitution himself, meaning over those territories, he was basically like a king because he had executive, judicial, and legislative power over them. The original treaty gave the United States jurisdiction, asserted that inhabitants of the accreted territory would enjoy the same rights as all American citizens. Jefferson changed the wording to white inhabitants. If he had never changed those words, then there would have been a whole lot of free black people, or the argument could be made constitutionally. Jefferson saw this expanse of land as part of a gigantic Indian reservation to which he could forcibly relocate the remaining members of the Eastern Native American tribes. He told William Henry Harrison, a future president and the governor of Indiana Territory at that time, quote, "Should any tribe be foolhardy enough to take up the hatchet at any time, the seizing of the whole country of that tribe and driving them across the Mississippi as only condition of peace would be an example to others and a furtherance of our final consolidation," end quote. Sounds like October 7th and what the Israeli government did to the Palestinians. Had Jefferson wanted to end the evil of slavery, he could have done it with the stroke of a pen. He could have gone the route of the reformist postnatal emancipation plans, whereby persons born on or after a certain date were freed at a certain age. His 1873 draft of a constitution for the state of Virginia contained a provision that would have emancipated those born after December 31st, 1800. The draft language was absent from the final document. Jefferson did nothing of the sort. And in fact, he supported the continuing expansion of slavery. He saw slavery as beneficial to white people, but he tried to hide this belief by advocating the dubious dispersion theory, which held that if slavery were dispersed throughout the country, it would end more quickly on a state-by-state basis. A visitor to Monticello in 1820 wrote of Jefferson's determination to make the new Louisiana territories safe for slavery. Quote, "Among other political points, that which has been called Missouri question stood prominent. He said that nothing had happened since the Revolution, which gave him so much anxiety and so much disquieting fears for the safety and happiness of his country. I fear," said he, "that much mischief has been gone already. But if they carry matters to extremities again at the approaching sessions of Congress, Nothing short of almighty power can save us. The Union will be broken. All the horrors of civil war, embittered by local jealousies and mutual reclamations, will ensue. Bloodshed, rapine, and cruelty will soon roam at large, will desolate our once happy land and turn the fruitful field into a howling wilderness. Out of such a state of things will naturally grow a war of extermination towards the African in our land. Instead of improving the conditions of this poor, afflicted, degraded race, terminating in the ordering of wisdom, in equal liberty, and the enjoyment of equal rights, in which direction public opinion is advancing with rapid strides, the course pursued by those who make high professions of humanity and of friendship for them would involve them as well as us in certain destruction. If you free the slaves, we'll all be destroyed. Basically. End quote. The Missouri question, which led to the 1820 Missouri Compromise, establishing which states would allow or prohibit slavery, would ultimately push the nation to war, and Jefferson foresaw as much. The Union would be broken if anti-slavery forces didn't quiet themselves and disappear. Jefferson predicted civil war, but he could not comprehend the defeat of the slavocracy, only the destruction of Black people. It is easier for someone to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. If we were able to break the back, relatively, of slavery, do you not think we can break the back of capitalism? What did that guy on the gentleman on Jurassic Park, what did he say? He said, life finds a way. Life finds a way. Exploitation, we're done with it. If we can break the yoke of slavery, relatively speaking, then we can break the yoke of exploitation in this country too. It takes organizing, yes. It takes dedication. Some of us may never see that tree bear fruit, but we're ensuring that it will bear fruit by watering, fertilizing, and giving it sunlight. Before the Louisiana Purchase was finalized, Jefferson, James Madison, and George Washington made sure that the nation's capital remained in slave territory. It is true that Alexander Hamilton made a deal to assume the war debts of the United States in exchange for moving the capital from New York farther south to Philadelphia, and then to the newly created city wedged between Maryland and Virginia. But that transaction was hardly the primary motivation. A federal capital carved out of territory taken from existing states could have been located elsewhere. The rationale for creating an entirely new city, located in the swamp no less, enslaved territory, was to give slavery legal and physical protection. The choice made little sense unless one acknowledges the importance of slavery to the growth and development of the American economy. The reason why Washington, D.C. is in the South is because they wanted to keep slavery. And who built the White House? Jefferson certainly knew of its importance to the settler colonial state and to himself personally. In 1798, his friend Tadeusz Kosciuszko drew up a will asking Jefferson to use this estate to free enslaved people. Quote, I beg Mr. Jefferson that in the case I should die without will or testament, he should buy out of my money so many Negroes and free them, that the restante remaining sums should be sufficient to give them education, and provide for their maintenance. He revised the will 18 years later and made his desires clearer. Quote, I do hereby declare and direct that I should make no other testamentary disposition of my property in the United States. I hereby authorize my friend Thomas Jefferson to employ the whole thereof in purchasing Negroes from among his own or any others. End quote. But Jefferson never used to bequest to do anything that Kosciuszko asked. When he died, enslaved persons were sold to pay off his debt. Despite his pretend angst, he was a slaveholder to the very end. So that's Thomas Jefferson. That's who he was. Even when he had a chance to do the right thing, when he had his friend that said, do the right thing by me, he didn't do it. It's just like the people who go, I feel like they'll say things like, well, healthcare is a human right. I believe healthcare is a human right. But yet they don't do anything to truly pass real universal healthcare. Hell, to me, the minimum they could have did was do a single payer healthcare system, but they don't want to do that. Joe Biden said that he'll veto it on day one if it comes to his desk. He said it to Lawrence O'Donnell. Hell, they sure as hell will never do a nationalized healthcare system. When they say, I believe in, but then they don't do it, that tells you everything you need to know. Because belief requires actions. And they'll say, well, we improve healthcare for many people. We expanded. It's the same thing that Thomas Jefferson said. Well, I don't think slavery is right, and yet he kept his slaves. It's the same thing where they talk about, oh, we want peace in this region, yet you still keep supplying Israel with weapons. You still keep sending your military into African countries. You still keep trying to coup countries in South America. You don't believe in peace. You're BSing us. Thomas Jefferson was BSing people when he said that he wanted slavery to end. He didn't want slavery to end. If he was about it, he would have did it. But he was never about it. This is what happens when you have a country whose founders are hypocrites and whose country's founders are horrible human beings. And people will say, well, they were flawed. And yet you make excuses for them, but the people who are sitting in prison right now, you don't make excuses for those people. You don't make excuses for the people who are sitting in prison right now. You give more grace to a child rapist than you do to some dude that was selling some bricks on the corner. All because he doesn't have enough money for rent. All because he doesn't have enough money for transportation. All because there is no living wage that actually pays people. So therefore, they make the reasoning, well, I might as well do this because I'll actually be able to survive by doing this. And I may be able to even thrive. Or when we want to cancel student debt, you guys look at us like we're crazy. And yet you guys are founding fathers. More like a deadbeat dad. The next one we're going to be covering is part 4 is James Madison. And then after James Madison, then another James Monroe. James Madison, James Monroe. And then we'll move on to pre-Civil War after that. These are kind of short, so I'm thinking about next time pre-Civil War. I think I'm going to do 4 parts. I can cover James Madison, James Monroe, and then John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. He was a bastard. Andrew Jackson was the worst. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. Well, but that's it. That's what I'm reading today. It's going to be interesting, man. This book is already. And the thing is, like, you need people to say in a very plain and honest way about the founding fathers of this country. And it's funny because there was a lady. I think there was a lady that said something not too long ago about fascism. Okay. There's a quote that there's a tweet that I want to share. And let me enlarge this. So this person, Male is Spicy, says, I never thought I'd see Americans embrace fascism. Right there. I never thought I'd see Americans embrace fascism. Let me ask you something. From what I just read about John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and what I've read about George Washington, and what I will read about the next few presidents, do you think fascism was never here? The fascists got their ideas from these gentlemen. Fascism has. You think fascism is a novel idea here in the United States? Look at this from RBN Maine. It says Americans have always embraced fascism. Let's see if we can play this.
The film is about a rally that took place in New York in Madison Square Garden in 1939 when 20,000 Americans gathered for a Nazi rally. The whole film is made of archival footage. There's no voiceover, there are no interviews. It sort of parachutes the viewer into this rally and without explanation. And when you first arrive, you see people protesting outside, maybe not so sure what's going on. The marquee outside describes it as a pro-America rally. And then we go inside, you see people marching in with American flags, and there's a huge 30-foot portrait of George Washington. But then you start to look a little closer and you realize that there's swastikas on either side of him, and that the people are holding flags that have swastikas, and they start to do the Nazi salute.
So first of all, they revered George Washington. Why? And they have their swastikas. Why? Because they knew who the hell George Washington was. They knew who the hell Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were. They knew who the hell these people were. They held the same beliefs. They held the same values. And people will say, well, fascism has never been in the United States. Whoo, there it is. This is why books like this by Margaret Kimberly are so important. This is why it is so important to read books like this, because it shows you what the truth really is. The truth is, fascism has been here for about 250 years. This has been a fascist government for 250 years. Now, they try to put reins on fascism. But of course, fascists really do not like communists. So we have the McCarthyite era, right? Because they kind of started slowing up on their persecution of communists. They got lackadaisical. But then, guess what? They turned it up during the Cold War. And it allowed them to pursue, to create more fascism. Because if fascism is basically business and government uniting together in order to create a system of subjugation, right? What do you call white landowning slave owners creating a government? What do you call that? A person who owns plantations and owns hundreds of slaves, a person that owns the means of production, and that is making sure that he exploits, and I can say he confidently because slave owners were men, because it was misogynist as hell, that they owned as many people as they possibly could so that they could maximize their profit. And it was forced labor. And they were the ones who held seats in government. Therefore, if that is fascism, well, the United States has been fascist ever since its inception. And it's funny how people will say, oh my God, I can't believe it's going to turn into fascism. We're trying to vote out fascism. You can't vote out fascism if this state has been fascist from its birth. The system needs to change massively in order for that to happen. And by massively, meaning you have to tear down the institutions and rebuild brand new ones. It would literally need to take that. Continuing on.
And you discover that this rally is sort of using the icons of American patriotism to sell anti-Semitism and hate.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow American patriots.
The rally was organized by a group called the Bund, which was sort of the American Nazi party at that point. They shared a Nazi ideology of anti-Semitism, not wanting Jews to have positions of power. The leader talks during the rally about the importance of taking America back from the Jews who were destroying it.
What we are actively fighting for under our charter. First, a social just white Gentile ruled United States. Second, Gentile-controlled labor union free from Jewish Moscow-directed domination.
Said Moscow. Fascists hate commies. Why? Because we're on the opposite end, baby. Never allow people to tell you, well, communists and fascists are virtually the same. No. Complete opposite. Do not let the duopoly tell you who your enemy is. And every accusation from the duopoly is a confession.
During the rally, a protester runs out on stage, and he is a man named Isidore Greenbaum, who was a 20-something-year-old plumber's assistant from Brooklyn, Jewish, who came to the rally that night just to kind of check it out, and was so moved and outraged by what he was seeing on stage that he ran out on stage. You see him grabbed by the forces of the American Nazis who were on the stage, and they beat him and rip his pants off and throw him off the stage. And it's a really brutal and sort of frightening moment. It sort of triggers this mob mentality that allows them to laugh and cheer as somebody gets beaten up and as somebody speaks, hatred towards a group of people that are going to be murdered by the millions in the next couple of years. You know that if there's a rally where 20,000 people show up, that there are many, many thousands of people beyond that who didn't come out that night but share the philosophy. And I think America in the 1930s, anti-Semitism, discrimination against Jews and other minority groups was not the mainstream philosophy, not the majority of Americans' philosophy, but it was a legitimate philosophy. People like Henry Ford and Lindbergh. There was a famous radio talk show host named Father Coughlin who had a radio show that was broadcast into 30 million Americans' homes. And he would say good things about Mussolini, good things about Hitler. The philosophy of this group was considered a legitimate philosophy in America, really until World War II started. The rally took place 80 years ago this month in February, just a few days before the Oscars that are about to happen. You might think that for a story that's 80 years old, it's just ancient history. It doesn't have anything to do with today. But we're seeing in America a rise of hate crimes. To me, the lesson of the film is that we are vulnerable. We are vulnerable to leaders who will stir us up against each other. We're vulnerable to leaders who take symbols of things that we love, the American flag and the national anthem, and use those to make us hate each other and hate groups of minorities or Muslims or African Americans or whatever. And I think that the film shows that we have to be vigilant.
Now, one of the things I will say is that's why it's important for us to have worker solidarity with each other, no matter who we are. If how we live our lives has no adverse effect on other people, then why are we hating on them? Why are we demonizing and hating on people who don't have any power? So when people blame and place blame on other groups, you need to be very, very careful. The blame is squarely on the corporate parasites because fascism is a tool to maintain power, because it's a tool to keep us divided. This is why it's so important for us to not only leave the duopoly, but to also build dual power. Because this is what they did back in the past. And they gave poor whites just a little bit extra power above my ancestors in order to make them feel like, well, you're better. And then on top of it, because of my ancestors being forced into slavery, well, guess what? A lot of poor whites, guess what happened to them? They suffered economically because the jobs that they could have been doing for a wage, my ancestors were exploited. But guess what? The rich landowning whites told them, those slaves are the people you need to hate because they're the ones that are taking your jobs. And then once the Civil War ended and we were freed, oh yeah, that ramped up because apparently we were stealing their jobs. What does that sound like? So instead of uniting with us, they hated on us. So it's important for us to take that into consideration. Demonizing people who have no power, that's fascism. Let's finish this up.
About defending the values that we think are important, about defending tolerance and defending kindness and defending, defending respect for different kinds of people in America.
So she said, I never thought I'd see Americans embrace fascism. I responded, I said, a nation that committed an extermination of indigenous people and enslaved hundreds of thousands of Africans. Ma'am, fascism is baked into the system. Wait until you hear about Operation Paperclip. And that's going to be your homework assignment. I want you guys to look into Operation Paperclip and look at what it did and who it served and who it continues to serve down to this day. Go ahead, look up Operation Paperclip if you're so inclined. And that'll tell you everything you need to know and why this system needs to change. Go ahead and give a like, share, and subscribe for more Jaybefaunt deliciousness, baby. Thank you so very much. Before we get into the rest of the chat, I'm going to go into here and we're going to give a shout out to the patrons. So yes, absolutely. Hang on, let me do this really quick. Okay, scroll that up. All right. Beautiful. All right. So let's give a shout out to the patrons on Patreon. Without you guys, I would not be able to do this work. You guys make this possible. And here are the tiers. We have Mega Jaybefaunters, Super Duper Jaybefaunters, Super Jaybefaunters, Jaybefaunters, Comrade, Solidarity, and JB members. And a shout out, big shout out to new members, Tisha and Mark P. Thagao. Thank you very much for becoming patrons on Patreon. It means the world to me, and it keeps the lights on. Also, my channel is demonetized. So if you'd like to support the channel, you can support via Patreon or PayPal. It's both linked in the description down below. All right, so let's get to the chat. Say hello to a few peeps and get your thoughts. Zoe says, didn't John Adams marry his cousin? Oh, never mind, it was his son. Damn, I didn't know that. All right. C. Curtin says, yep, good to have you in the chat as well. Mr. Meepzor said, capitalism, another form of slavery. Yep. Traveler's Wolf says, remember, you can't put morals of today on societies of the past. The funny thing is they actually knew what they were doing is wrong. Cobra Commander says, yeah, but how do we get eggs from bunnies? I'm still not. What are y'all talking about in the chat? Cobra Commander says, I'd like to remind folks that George Washington owned human beings. I don't care what time era you're in, owning human beings, poofed. Yeah. You see. Kenneth Ellison says, I'm going to buy the book. I highly recommend it. And I've had Margaret Kimberly on before. I would like to have her on towards the end of reading this book so that we can actually discuss it. But yes, a book like this was desperately needed. Travis Wolf said Nuremberg laws were based on Jim Crow laws. Interesting. And this is very true. Travis Wolf said Hitler took the USA as his model for Jewish subjugation. Yeah. And the thing is, a lot of times people talk about the Jews being persecuted in the Holocaust. It wasn't just Jews, right? It was people of color that looked like me. It was also gay people. And remember, the gay people were given the pink triangle, right? Jehovah's Witnesses were given the purple triangle. If you guys would like to look that up, Jehovah's Witnesses were also persecuted in Nazi Germany. Also, fellow Germans who resisted Nazism and the communists, the socialists, the trade unionists, they were also persecuted by the Nazis as well, even though some of them were of Jewish descent. I'm sorry, of German descent. And on top of it, all the people who were disabled were also persecuted during the Holocaust, during the German Holocaust. So a lot of different groups were also, harmed during the Holocaust and murdered during the Holocaust. So yes, we focus a lot on the Jewish people, but we also need to focus on the LGBTQ people, the disabled people, the people of color, and the communists as well. They were also victims of the Holocaust. So yes, we don't want to forget that group as those groups as well. When we talk about the Holocaust, it's not just Jewish people. Yes, Jewish people were the main ones, but there's other groups as well. PT says, looking sharp, JB, keep up the great work. Thank you so very much. Appreciate it. Lou's coming in saying the slave states dealt with its poor whites by shipping them off to the military and then to settle newly conquered lands. Yep. This farm has been in my family for generations. And yeah, that farm that you have is land that was actually owned by indigenous people that was actually stolen from them. It's wild. It's basically an illegal settlement. There are illegal settlements all over this country. All over this country. Your pawpaw's farm that's been in the family for 200 years, yeah, that's an illegal settlement. Real talk, that's an illegal settlement. But a lot of people don't want to talk about it. A lot of people don't want to think about it like that. PT says J.D. Vance at the RNC pretended to be pro-worker, then went on to attack immigrants and asylum seekers who are workers. Tells me he doesn't actually have solidarity with the working class. No. And be very careful with people who demonize workers just because they're undocumented. Like, the thing is that they are also being used as well. And then you'll get people who go, well, a lot of these people who are undocumented, a lot of these immigrants, they don't like black people. They're anti-black. But the thing is, it's like, hell, there are a lot of black people who are anti-black. And there are also a lot of immigrants that are not anti-black. And a lot of the anti-black immigrants, especially those who come here legally, they're picked out. They're chosen to come here because the ones who actually have solidarity with us, they're not chosen to come here because a lot of them, they're too poor to come here because the United States doesn't want them to come here. The United States actually have a policy of getting people who are either well-to-do or more affluent in their countries that they can come here. This is especially of brown countries. If you're more affluent or you're well-to-do, or if you have a really great education in those countries, then you can come. You can't be working poor and then come here from a country like Ethiopia or Nigeria or India or Bangladesh. You cannot come here if you are working poor, because number one, it takes money just to come here. Number two, they only want people who have educations. Therefore, most of the people who actually would have solidarity with us as Black people aren't coming here. They're not allowed to come here because they don't make enough money. So when people talk about, oh, well, all these immigrants, they don't like us, it's like the ones that the United States chooses to come here. Oh yeah, of course. They're deeply ultra right wing in their values. This is why when they come here, they still go with the duopoly and they still go with the conservatives. Because they know that those of us who are poor, those of us who are working class or working poor, we actually have a proclivity, an inclination towards a system outside of capitalism. They don't want somebody who sees capitalism for the evil it is. They want people who they still benefited from the system, and where they're from, that means that they'll embrace it here too. Even though their numbers are much more smaller. So we have to see our fellow workers as comrades. We have to have solidarity with them. Mikhail says that reaction. Creative Experiment says immigrants who came from the defeated CIA armies overseas are also allowed USA citizenship. Yep. Let's take a look at the Rockfin. We are good on the Rockfin chat. That's good. Let me take a look at the Rumble. We'll see if I have any Rumble rants. Let me see. Looks like we're good there too. All right. So yeah, that was a very interesting portion that I wanted to cover. I gotta give my flowers to Margaret Kimberly, aka Auntie Margaret, for writing this book. It is just a learning experience, and it's just, and the thing is, it's in bite-sized pieces, which means it's easy to digest, right? Which is what I appreciate. So I cannot wait to have her on to talk about the book. And when that happens, I will let you guys know, and it'll be a great conversation to have. But talking about our presidents and how they're really just a symptom of the system, right? Like Donald Trump is a symptom of the system. Joe Biden is a symptom of the system. And this is why the system needs to change. This is why in places like Venezuela, you know, they have the president that they have. They have Nicolas Maduro because he's a symptom of their system. Meaning, if you have a system that's more egalitarian, you're going to have a symptom of the system. That is, you know, your chief executive. And who is Nicolas Maduro? He's pro-worker. He was a bus driver. And he has solidarity with people, especially indigenous people. You know, same thing with Xi Jinping, right? He's a symptom of their system. You know, he's a product of their system, meaning that he's going to be more pro-worker because that's the system that demands it. So if we really want to have people in our government that are demanding of a system that is egalitarian towards us, we have to change the system so that the symptoms of the system are people who are in favor of us rather than the parasite class. But that takes organization. So with that being said, I'm going to head on out. Thank you so very much to everybody for tuning in. The next time when I come back, I think I'll be reading Water in the Spirit by Melodoma Produce Some. And then I will continue in my reading of The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love by Bell Hooks. So we'll continue in that reading as well. And so, yes, thank you so very much. Like I always say to everybody, water your plants, water yourselves, leave the world better than you found it. Smoke them if you got them, drink them if you got them. If you ain't got them, then watch something funny because joy is revolutionary. And read because reading is fundamental. I love you all for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. And oh yeah, by the way, mwah, forehead kisses. I'll see y'all in the next one. Deuces, Bruces. Thank you so very much for watching my channel, and I deeply appreciate it from the top and bottom of my heart. If you wish to support the channel further, so I can keep bringing you content that is educational and informative, you can become a patron on patreon.com/Jaybefaunt. You can find that link in the pinned comment or in the description below. No matter what you give, you'll be supporting independent media and education that helps make the world better. Thank you so much, and you can watch more of my content here. Mwah. Forehead kisses, and have a beautiful day.